Unleash the power of your mind. Wear a levity, raw, edgy, humorless apparel for the discriminating activists. Live free or cry. Welcome to another episode of Mind Matters, the talk program that provokes critical thinking, logic, and reason. We encourage all of our listeners to use their common sense in all of their decision making, especially if it involves an issue that you think is important or one that affects your liberties and God-given rights. Welcome back to another episode of Mind Matters. My partner in audio crime or audio conversation, Mr. Dan Ploger, engineer, combat veteran, just a great guy with a great passion for the truth and for authenticity. How you doing, Dan?
Doing great, John. Good to be with you.
Awesome, man. And and also thank you to those listeners and viewers out there who tune in once a week or however many times we do this. Sometimes it's twice a week, but we appreciate you and glad to see that you're trying to educate yourselves on things like critical thought, logic, and reason, which is what we do. We provoke those things here on Mind Matters. And today's show is no different from what we've been doing. We're going to talk about a really famous person, celebrity, this guy behind me. Some of you may George Dennis Patrick Carlin, who lived from 1937 to 2008, was an American comedian, actor, author, and social critic. Regarded as one of the most important and influential stand-up comedians of all time, he was dubbed the Dean of Counterculture Comedians. The following stand-up routine was called They Own You. Quote, "But there's a reason. There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks. And it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that." I'm talking about the real owners now, the real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets, and they own all the big media companies. So they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. No, they're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest." End quote. And he goes on and in more detail talks about how the system is rigged and how we have these illusions these days of freedom and choice and all this. But the reality is that there are people much more powerful and wealthier than us pulling all the strings and working towards some kind of dystopian state. Now, there's a verse in the Bible, Ecclesiastes, I think 14:1, that says that basically it's always been this way. Each generation is the same, and there's nothing new under the sun. Now, I got to tell you, Dan, I think that the world kind of was locked in that way until the founding fathers wanted to change things. They wanted to change how monarchies had always done business as usual. And they created this US Constitution. Good or bad, it was the first time in the history of global government that power was given to the people. And there was a system, there is a system of checks and balances between the legislature, which is the politicians and the lawmakers, and the judiciary, which is the Supreme Court and our rules of law, and then the executive branch, which were the managers. You know, they came up with this brilliant plan, and everything seems to have been going along pretty well, probably up until the last 50, 60 years, when the counterculture started, in which George Carlin was part of. And again, this conversation is not all about me. This is about the people. This is about what's important to us and how we would like to be governed. And I got to tell you, Dan, ever since the COVID thing, I think the COVID pandemic unleashed this or opened up this Pandora's box. And I think more and more people are starting to see the writing on the wall. What do you think about George's stand-up act? Was he spot on or not?
Well, he tends to take a more pessimistic view of things than I do. But I guess one point of encouragement, to me anyway, is that he was complaining about this, what's going on today, 50 years ago. So nothing seems to have gotten much worse. So maybe we're in a state of perpetual misery where we think we're okay, but we're really not. You see it all the time. What are you saying? That it's the man runs things, and probably does. And there's a lot of things that go on, a lot of decisions that are made that we're not even a party to. What do you think happens in a 4,500-page tax bill that goes to Congress that no congressman, no senator has read that? What do you think gets slipped in there to satisfy the desires of certain powerful individuals? I'm sure. I know it happens. You can see. You can do a postmortem on the Inflation Reduction Act, which is now no longer touted as a reduction, an Inflation Reduction Act, but rather a climate change act. So, I guess I can take solace, John, in knowing that, well, things don't seem to have gotten much worse since George was on stage.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's an optimistic point. And it's interesting. I did some due diligence back in the 90s. I wanted to get an idea about the wealth of those people who are in federal, who we elect as our politicians in DC. And it was kind of interesting how, I was able to find a lot of this information online and how people were worth a certain amount before they went into office. And then after, a term in office, their wealth had exponentially just skyrocketed. And what I found out is that a lot of these people in Congress and in the Senate are multimillionaires, but they didn't start out that way. And I used to think to myself, how in the world can a legislative elected body of people who are become multimillionaires, how would they have anything in common with the average Jane or Joe on the street who's just struggling to pay their bills? And I always found that, we talk about being out of touch and tone deaf, and now it's just so flagrant. It's ridiculous. We see these elected officials doing things. They gave us the illusion in the past that they cared. And now it doesn't appear that way. They're doing stuff that absolutely doesn't benefit the average person, citizen. And for sure it's helping somebody somewhere who helped to get them to where they're at. Look at John Fetterman. I mean, that's a mockery of the whole election process system. And what I know high school students and probably younger who are more capable of doing his position, And sorry, John, with all due respect, I have great compassion for your personal, physical, and mental issues, but that's just an example of what we're talking about. Seriously? John Fetterman is capable of handling a position in the U.S. Congress and make important decisions that have to do with our tax money? I'm not buying it. Why can't we say that out loud? We just did.
Well, that's right. It's a truth, and it's a self-evident truth. I don't know what you can call Fetterman other than a cynical uh, a cynical act to put somebody in a position that they're really incapable of, and it really will reflect on their personal capabilities and their legacy and their personal image and pride. And I don't know how in this world of postmodernism that can be overlooked. I mean, that's practically the mantra. So it's sad, but they've done the same thing with the president. I think that Jill Biden is probably one of the most cynical. I would never even want to come close to meeting her. That she would put her husband through. What she put him through. The guy has always been a failure. His failures are well documented. But who would have thought that he would improve as he became senile? And I don't think it's certainly not a secret he's senile. And we all have had or have grandfathers and grandmothers that are in that position. And we make accommodations and we try to put forth a heartfelt level of support. But I'm sorry when I guess we're playing with real bullets now, and it takes on a different meaning than it just did when we're talking about our grandparents.
Yeah, those are some great points. I think about there was a song by The Who called "The Eminence Front," and how people put on this front that they're pious and religious and all this, but it's just a front while they're frolicking behind the scenes, right? So when I think about these politicians and going from basically modest means to multimillionaire means, I wonder who are the people behind the scenes, that are using now the federal government as a front to do their agenda. Who do you think these people are? And not going, and we've heard this, it's easy to call somebody a conspiracy theory who's asking critical thought type of questions, because that's what happens is you demonize those who are opposing your schemes. That's propaganda 101. We've seen this throughout all of history. So, at the risk of being labeled a conspiracy theorist, who do you think these people are that are using now the American government? Probably been using it for plenty of years now, but for a number of years, who do you think these people are that George alluded to, these corporate moguls and others? But I think it's global now.
I think one of them goes back to the Eisenhower days when he's talking about the military industrial complex. That we need to be fearful of that, and I think that the war in $40 billion to the war in Ukraine is testimony. These are corporations and groups, and the CEOs all socialize with one another, and the politicians are steered in the direction of of creating new and better bombs to destroy and kill. And it's pretty amazing. And think about it: these industries keep producing new weapons. Well, that makes the old weapons obsolete. So what do you do with the old weapons? Well, you sell them. You sell them to somebody like Ukraine or Samoa or something, and that's what and better yet, you start a war, and you can just use them all up. The beauty about spending $1 million on a cruise missile is that all that's left is smoke.
Yeah, death and destruction. It's interesting you bring up the military-industrial complex because they didn't call it they didn't dub Eisenhower conspiracy guy back then. They may have tried, but even further back, Abraham Lincoln himself, at the end of the American Civil War, basically said that that he was happy that the Union had held, that America was going to come out for the better despite all the losses, but he was truly concerned about the new business sector that had sprung up, the business of war. I mean, he actually said that, and sure enough, within a couple of months, somebody sneaks into his booth at Ford's Theater and puts a cap in his head. I mean, who knows? Where was the guard? Why did they leave the door open? And you just wonder.
Yeah.
And then the CIA and the Bush family, and maybe we're talking about people we shouldn't be talking about, but there was a book out not long ago, 6 years ago or so, called The Devil's Chessboard, about the Dulles family and the CIA and the makings of the war machine, which you just described, the billions and millions of dollars that are being made on weaponry and advanced weaponry, and it keeps improving, and somebody's getting rich. Is that where we're headed? The last gasp, but not just American air, but human air. I don't know.
Well, of course, this is what we're talking about is the realm of the Rhino Republicans, who appear to be on the way out, hopefully anyway. So, I mean, the military-industrial complex is certainly one group of owners or people that are pulling the strings. Another, we've had some news in the last week of Rupert Murdoch is another example of one of these guys that's just they're pulling the strings to make things the way they want, and there are considerations other than profit, and there are considerations other than moral considerations that drive these media companies, and that's a problem. The CIA, which goes back to Senior Bush when he was the director of the CIA. And now we all suspect that they were even some involvement to some level in the assassination of a president, a very popular president, who opposed the war, it should be noted. He was assassinated soon after he announced the withdrawal of troops from Vietnam. So I'm afraid that George is probably right, and I just maybe I'm just happier if I just don't know about these people and go on and try and struggle from day to day and pretend that I'm free, know the laws, and abide by the laws, but pretend and feel in my mind that I'm free. But maybe this is an outmoded idea. I don't know.
Yeah, some great points again, Dan. As always, when you travel around the world, and you see how people live and struggle in other countries, it certainly brings delight and makes me so grateful to be an American, to come back to this country. And despite all of our troubles and things that appear at times to be not right, we still have it better than I'd say 99% of the rest of the world. Unless, we were to buy an island off the coast of, Costa Rica and live off the grid, that might be the best you can get. Right. But you mentioned media, social media and big tech. And what comes to mind, this is kind of stark, but, you look at Facebook with Mark Zuckerberg, and you look at Twitter with Jack Dorsey, and you look at the people who were on their boards or who were involved in their hierarchy of leadership. And a lot of them were ex-FBI, ex-CIA operatives and managers. And, you have to wonder, why would a social media company, I'm putting this out there rhetorically, want to have ex-CIA and ex-FBI guys running the operation? It would seem to me that that's like, hello. And pretty flagrant about it. You know, the mass manipulation of people, and you look around and you've got to see just how people are on edge everywhere, not just in America. It seems global now.
Yeah, we had a couple incidents last week of people being shot for driving down the wrong driveway and knocking on the wrong door, and that's an indication that we've got a trigger finger, and we have to be careful because we're living in an environment that's potentially can go out of control, and in situations like that, bad decisions are made when the emotional stakes are high. So we have to, as critical thinkers, you and I, we have to be very cautious and very deliberative in forming our opinions and evaluating events that happen on the world stage and in the United States stage.
Yeah, that's true. And I you know, I've always said if you hear a story and it's sensational, that's what they there's a reason for that. It's to get ratings, it's to get viewers and this. And but I always say give it a 48 hours, 72 hours. Give it the litmus test of time. And what I tend to find out is more often than not, whatever the story is that has everybody in an uproar, it just goes away. Yeah. So I say, you know, whatever you hear or read or listen to and has you in an uproar, just give it some time. It'll go away. And maybe Dan's right. Maybe we should just go through our lives in a stupor and consider ourselves very lucky to be in America because there are more opportunities here. Trust me on that one.
Well, as evidence, John, is look what's happening at our borders. I mean, the world still wants to be in the United States of America. We've got it better than anybody else. And it's only these people in positions of power that are saying otherwise, that are trying to stir up the pot and get institutions to change in their direction. So,
yeah, and when you even look at the concept of leadership, leaders are supposed to bring those whom they lead together. And that's anything but what we're seeing like every day. You know, these leaders are, I mean, I've seen leaders basically just call for trouble and
well,
division and to rise up. And yeah,
look at Joe Biden's campaign. He just announced he's running. But what's the message? The message is that half the country are radicals. So it's ever since President Obama, the rule of leadership has been lead by division. That's one way to lead, but it's not a very effective way to lead. It always ends in disaster, and because you're dividing your own power base. You can divide the nation to create revolution, but then what have you got when that's done? You got a bunch of pieces. So it's not a very sound strategy. The old West Point method of leading, by which means to get people with having diverse goals to unite under a common goal and unite their efforts. That's what leadership is, and we don't see that. We saw it a little bit with some exceptional politicians, but you don't see it very often. The rule has been to let's lead by division and let's create smaller and smaller pieces and get people to think like victims. And then you've got a formula for to create revolution. And I don't mean revolution I mean revolution in the sense of just change. And the purpose, of course, to change is to steer money interests in one direction or another.
yeah, that was a good point you raised about Obama. I can remember in his second um, administration, couldn't believe all of the division. I mean, we hadn't seen stuff like that in decades. And I was saying to my wife, I said, it's like he's taken the race card or the race issue back, you know, rather than moving forward. He seemed to
Right.
start things in a different direction. And you know what's interesting about history, if you understand anything about it, and where power bases have been minimized or diminished, those who were in power didn't meet a very interesting fate. You know, a lot of times they met the fate of the subordinate or the constituents that they steered in the wrong direction. And you know, we don't advocate for violence, but sometimes violence is some people's means to an end. And all I know is this, is that if you know you poke the bear long enough, history shows you that there's going to be an uprising. Things are not going to go as planned, or maybe they are as planned. Who knows? Maybe you create so much instability that you just, you know, you get everything you want at the top, and then the people at the bottom are holding the bag, as they always have throughout all of history.
Yeah, quite possibly. Quite possibly.
So I'd just say that's a good place to end it here for today. And, you know, keep it short, sweet, and simple. And, you know, ask yourself when you look in the mirror, who owns you? Do they own you? What do you think about that? And what can you do in your daily life to make things better? How can you stay informed? Where do you go to get your news? Who do you talk to? Who do you rely on to get the real and the true news? It's a good question to ask.
I think that you're talking about critical thinking, John.
Yeah. And guess what? Aren't you the best judge or the best decision maker when it comes to what's right for you in your life, and not listen to somebody else's narrative, just meant to keep you at odds with somebody who you probably wouldn't be at odds with? And what I have found is that most people, when you get them like this in a conversation, and they let their guard down, their political bias, most people want exactly the same things that you want. And we're never going to reach the promised land, so to speak, if we're at each other's throats all the time.
Amen, brother.
Well, good seeing you, Dan, and thank you for tuning in again to Mind Matters. We'll catch you on the next one. Stay alert, stay alive. Your mind matters, but only if you use it. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Mind Matters. Remember, your mind matters, but only if you use it. Stay alert, stay alive, keep your eyes wide open.